In the heart of glamorous Beverly Hills, Big Shaq, the towering basketball legend, quietly stepped into his own upscale restaurant, wearing nothing but a simple t-shirt, old sweatpants, and worn-out sneakers, longing for just one peaceful meal away from the spotlight, only to be cruelly judged, deeply humiliated, and made to feel completely unworthy by the very people who were supposed to serve him. Until his calm strength and overflowing kindness sparked a heartbreaking yet life-changing moment that healed wounded hearts and reminded everyone in the room what true human dignity really means. Big Shaq had just finished a long day and was feeling pretty worn out as he walked down the busy Beverly Hills street. Standing over 7 feet tall with broad shoulders and powerful arms that once dominated basketball courts, he still carried that strong, athletic build even years after retiring. His face showed the marks of a life lived fully, kind eyes that had seen both incredible success and tough times, a neatly trimmed beard with a few gray hairs, and the easy, confident way he moved that made people notice him without him trying. But tonight, he wasn't dressed to impress anyone. He wore a simple gray t-shirt that was a little wrinkled from the day, comfortable black sweatpants, and his favorite pair of old sneakers that were scuffed and well broken in. He just wanted something normal, a quiet meal where he could sit back and unwind without cameras flashing or people asking for autographs. He pushed open the heavy glass door of the upscale restaurant and stepped inside, the cool air conditioning hitting him gently. The warm glow from the chandeliers lit up the elegant dining room, and for a moment, it felt welcoming. He spotted a small, discreet table toward the back and headed straight for it, hoping to stay out of the spotlight and enjoy some peace. All he really wanted was a good meal after a tiring day filled with meetings and memories of his old life on the court. The place smelled amazing, like fresh bread and sizzling steaks, and the soft background music made everything feel calm and inviting. Before he could even settle fully into his chair, a waitress named Sophia walked up to him. She gave him a quick scan from head to toe, and her expression changed right away. There was no friendly smile, just a tight, judgmental look in her eyes. She crossed her arms and said in a voice loud enough for the nearby tables to catch, "Are you sure you can afford a place like this? It's not exactly cheap, you know." Her words came out sharp, like she had already made up her mind that he didn't belong. Big Shaq looked up at her calmly, his broad shoulders relaxed as he sat there. He didn't get upset or defensive. Instead, he gave her a small, kind smile and replied in his deep, steady voice, "I'm just here for a good meal and a peaceful night. That's really all I'm looking for tonight." Sophia paused for a second, clearly surprised by how polite and unbothered he sounded. She shifted on her feet, annoyed that he hadn't reacted the way she expected. A few guests at nearby tables glanced over, picking up on the awkward tension building in the room. An older couple, Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, watched quietly from their table, the wife gently squeezing her husband's hand with a soft look of sympathy on her face. Big Shaq sat back a little, taking in the soft lights and the gentle buzz of conversations around him. Deep down, that old familiar feeling crept in. The one from years ago when people would size him up and assume things about him just because of how he looked. But he had learned long ago not to let it shake him. He stayed calm and gave people a chance to show who they really were. Sophia turned away without saying anything else, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she walked off. Little did she know, this tall man in simple clothes with the tired but kind eyes was about to change everything in that restaurant in ways no one could have predicted. The night was still young, but the quiet tension was already starting to fill the air. Sophia had been working at the restaurant for years and took pride in knowing exactly who belonged there. The moment she spotted Big Shaq sitting quietly at his table, something in her shifted. She straightened her uniform, put on a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes, and walked straight over to him. Without even asking what he wanted, she leaned in slightly and said loudly enough for several nearby tables to hear, "Are you sure this is the right place for you? It's pretty expensive here, and we usually get a different kind of customer." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, sharp and dismissive, making a few heads turn in their direction. Big Shaq looked up at her with the same calm expression he had carried since walking in. He didn't flinch or get defensive. Instead, he met her eyes steadily and replied in his deep, warm voice, "I'm just here for a good meal and a peaceful night. That's really all I need right now." There was no anger in his tone, just quiet dignity that seemed to fill the space around him. Sophia blinked, clearly thrown off by how unfazed he was. She had expected him to look embarrassed or maybe even leave, but he sat there like a man who had faced far bigger battles in his life and come out stronger. A couple of guests nearby exchanged glances, and the older couple, Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, watched with growing concern. Mrs. Hayes leaned over to her husband and whispered softly, "That poor man didn't do anything wrong. Why is she talking to him like that?" The tension in the room thickened just a little more. Big Shaq simply nodded politely at Sophia as if her rudeness hadn't touched him at all. Inside, though, he felt that familiar sting, the kind that reminded him of times when people judged him before they even knew his name. But he had learned long ago that reacting with anger only made things worse. Staying calm was his quiet way of standing tall. Sophia stood there for another second, her sharp eyes narrowing. She wasn't used to customers who didn't shrink under her words. "Fine," she muttered, pulling out her notepad a little too roughly. "I'll get you a menu then." As she turned to walk away, her heels clicked loudly against the floor, echoing her frustration. Big Shaq sat back in his chair, taking a slow breath. The warm lights above him felt a bit dimmer now, but he refused to let the moment ruin his night. He had come here for peace, and he was determined to hold on to that, no matter what. Little by little, the quiet judgment in the room was starting to build, pulling everyone in without them even realizing it. Sophia didn't waste any time after taking his order. She grabbed a menu and started walking through the restaurant with Big Shaq following quietly behind her. She led him right past all the nice tables in the middle, where couples and families were chatting happily under the soft lights. Instead, she kept going toward the back, weaving past servers carrying trays until they reached a noisy corner right next to the kitchen. The sound of clattering dishes and shouted orders spilled out from the swinging doors. She stopped at a small, dimly lit table and dropped the menu onto it with a loud thud. "This should suit you just fine," she said with a smirk, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she looked him up and down one more time. Big Shaq stood there for a moment, taking in the spot without saying a word. He could hear the chaos from the kitchen and feel the draft from the busy hallway, but he simply pulled out the chair and sat down. There was no complaint, no demand for a better table. He just nodded politely and said in his calm, deep voice, "Thank you for showing me to the table." His steady presence filled the corner in a way that made the whole situation feel even more unfair. A few guests nearby noticed what was happening, and their conversations quieted down a little as they watched. At a prime table in the center of the room, Mr. and Mrs. Hayes couldn't look away. Mrs. Hayes set her wineglass down slowly and whispered to her husband, "She just stuck him back there like he doesn't matter. That man hasn't done a single thing wrong." Mr. Hayes nodded, his face serious. "He's handling it better than most people would. There's real strength in staying calm like that." They both felt a quiet ache in their chests, remembering times when they had seen good people get treated unfairly just because of how they looked or dressed. The unfairness of the moment hung heavy in the air. Big Shaq opened the menu and looked through it slowly, his big hands gentle on the pages. Inside, he felt that familiar weight, the kind that came from years of people assuming things about him before they knew his story. But he breathed through it, reminding himself why he had come here in the first place, to enjoy a simple meal and a moment of peace. Sophia stood there a second longer, almost like she was waiting for him to get upset or leave. When he didn't, she turned on her heel and walked away, her shoulders stiff with frustration. The clatter from the kitchen seemed louder now, and the warm lights in the main dining area felt far away. Still, Big Shaq sat tall in that back corner, his calm energy quietly challenging the disrespect around him. The whole restaurant was starting to feel the shift, like something important was building beneath the surface. No one knew it yet, but this simple choice of a corner table was about to become the beginning of a night no one would forget. As Big Shaq sat in that noisy corner near the kitchen, the clatter of dishes and busy voices faded into the background, while his mind drifted back to older times. He thought about growing up in a tough neighborhood where money was always tight and people often judged him before he even opened his mouth. Back then, kids at school would tease him about his size and hand-me-down clothes, and adults would look at him like he didn't belong in certain places. Those memories still stung sometimes, especially on nights like this, when someone's quick judgment brought it all rushing back. He took a slow, deep breath and reminded himself of what he had learned over the years. Real strength wasn't about fighting back or showing off. It was about staying kind even when it was hard and choosing not to let other people's smallness change who you are. He ran his hand gently over the menu, his broad shoulders relaxed despite everything. In his heart, he knew this was just one more moment to rise above, the same way he had done on the basketball court when crowds doubted him or critics wrote him off. Across the room, Sophia stood at the service counter talking quietly with another server named Mike. She glanced back toward Big Shaq's table and whispered, "Look at him over there. He won't last 5 minutes once he sees the prices. Guys like that always try to act like they fit in, but they never do." Mike shifted uncomfortably and didn't say much back, clearly uneasy with how she was acting. Big Shaq couldn't hear her exact words, but he could feel the energy in the room shifting. A couple of guests kept stealing glances his way, some with sympathy and others with curiosity. He didn't let it shake him. Instead, he thought about his own kids and the lessons he wanted to teach them, about treating people right no matter what they looked like or where they came from. That thought gave him a quiet sense of peace, even in this uncomfortable spot. Sophia finished her whisper and walked off to help another table, her steps sharp and purposeful. The older couple, Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, kept watching from their table, their concern growing deeper with every passing minute. Big Shaq sat there quietly, his calm presence like a steady rock in the middle of the growing tension. He wasn't there to prove anything to anyone. He just wanted a decent meal and a chance to unwind. But deep down, he could sense that this night was becoming about something much bigger than dinner. The hurt from old memories was still there, but so was the strength he had built from them. And that strength was about to matter more than anyone in the restaurant could imagine. When Sophia finally returned to his table, after making him wait longer than necessary, Big Shaq had taken his time looking over the menu. He closed it gently and looked up at her with the same steady expression he had worn all night. "I'll have the most expensive steak on the menu," he said calmly. "The filet mignon with all the trimmings, please." For a second, Sophia just stared at him like she couldn't believe what she had heard. Then she let out a soft, mocking laugh that was loud enough for the tables closest to them to notice. She crossed her arms and said with a smirk, "That's for people who actually know good food. Hope you can handle it. It's not exactly a burger from a drive-thru, you know." Big Shaq met her eyes gently, without any hint of anger or embarrassment. He kept his voice warm, and even as he replied, "A great meal tastes better when it's served with respect. That's really what I'm looking forward to tonight." His words were simple but honest, and they landed with a quiet power that made the moment feel heavier. Sophia's smirk faltered just a little. She wasn't used to someone responding to her attitude with that kind of calm dignity. She scribbled down the order quickly, her pen pressing hard into the notepad, but she couldn't hide the irritation on her face. The tension in the room started to build as more guests picked up on the uncomfortable exchange. At their central table, Mr. Hayes leaned forward and whispered to his wife, "Did you hear that? She's being outright rude now. That man is showing more class sitting back there than she is walking around serving people." Mrs. Hayes nodded, her eyes soft with sympathy as she glanced toward Big Shaq. "It breaks my heart," she said quietly. "He's just trying to have a nice dinner, and she's treating him like he's less than everyone else." Their words were low, but the feeling was shared by a few other tables. People were starting to shift in their seats, uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Big Shaq sat back in his chair, his broad shoulders relaxed, even though the noise from the kitchen kept reminding him how far he had been pushed to the side. He thought about all the times in his life when people had underestimated him, on the court, in business, and in everyday situations just like this one. Those memories could have made him bitter, but instead they had taught him patience. He took a slow breath and looked around the elegant room, choosing to focus on the good smells coming from the kitchen rather than the disrespect. Sophia walked away without another word, but her stiff shoulders and quick steps showed how much his calm response had bothered her. The whispers around the restaurant grew a little louder. A young woman at a nearby table shook her head and said to her friend, "That waitress is out of line. He didn't even raise his voice once." Big Shaq heard some of it, but he stayed focused on the moment. He wasn't there to fight or prove anything. He just wanted a good meal after a long day. Still, the emotional weight in the room kept growing, like a quiet storm gathering strength. Everyone could feel it now, the sense that this night was heading toward something important, even if they didn't know exactly what was coming. Big Shaq simply waited, his steady presence a silent reminder that true strength often shows up in the quietest ways. Sophia took Big Shaq's order and then seemed to make it her mission to forget all about him. She moved from table to table with a bright smile for the well-dressed guests, chatting with them, refilling their drinks, and bringing out their food while his corner stayed completely ignored. Minutes turned into a long, uncomfortable wait. The kitchen noise kept rumbling beside him, and the delicious smells of other people's meals floated past, but nothing came for Big Shaq. He sat there patiently, hands resting on the table, watching the restaurant move around him like he wasn't even there. Rachel, a young woman sitting at a nearby table with her friend, couldn't stay quiet any longer. She leaned in and whispered angrily, "She's treating him like he doesn't matter at all. This is just wrong. He's been waiting forever and hasn't complained once." Her friend nodded, looking uncomfortable. "It's like she's doing it on purpose. I feel bad just watching this." Their words were soft, but they captured exactly what several other guests were feeling. The deliberate neglect was becoming obvious to more and more people in the room. Big Shaq remained calm through it all. He didn't wave her down or make a fuss. Instead, he sat tall in that back corner, his quiet strength filling the space in a way that only made Sophia more irritated every time she glanced his way. She knew he was still waiting, but she kept busy with other tables, laughing a little too loudly and taking extra time with every order. Deep down, his lack of reaction was getting under her skin. She had expected him to get upset or leave by now, but he just sat there with that steady, patient presence that made her feel smaller than she wanted to admit. Mr. Hayes watched the whole thing from across the room, his face tight with disapproval. He whispered to his wife, "She's testing him on purpose. I've never seen service like this in a place this nice." Mrs. Hayes squeezed his hand, her eyes sad. "That man has more patience than most of us put together. It's heartbreaking to watch." The longer the wait stretched on, the heavier the air in the restaurant felt. Guests who had been enjoying their evenings were now distracted, stealing glances toward the back corner and feeling a growing sense of unease. Big Shaq took a slow breath and stayed centered. He thought about his long career and all the times he had to wait for respect that should have come naturally. This moment felt like one more test, and he was determined to pass it with grace. Sophia walked past his table again without stopping, her tray full for another group. The deliberate neglect was clear now, and it was starting to affect the whole room. The tension kept rising, slow and steady, as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Big Shaq simply sat there, calm and strong, holding on to his peace even as the disrespect tried to take it away. Sophia walked past Big Shaq's table again, this time speaking loudly enough for several people to hear. "Some people just don't belong here no matter how hard they try," she said, her voice full of mockery. The words stung the air and hit Big Shaq directly. He stayed quiet, but the hurt showed for a brief moment in his eyes before he pushed it aside. Mr. Hayes shook his head slowly at the central table and whispered to his wife, "That young man has more class than most people in this room. He hasn't said a harsh word back." Mrs. Hayes nodded, her face tight with disappointment. "It's embarrassing to watch. She's being so cruel for no reason." A few other guests started shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Rachel whispered to her friend, "I can't believe she just said that out loud." The whispers began spreading from table to table. People who had been enjoying their dinners were now distracted, glancing toward the back corner with growing unease. Big Shaq sat still, breathing steadily. He had heard words like those before in his life, but he refused to let them break his calm. Sophia kept moving around the room, acting like nothing had happened, but the tension she created was growing stronger by the minute. The whole restaurant felt different now. What started as one rude comment had turned into a quiet wave of discomfort that no one could ignore. Big Shaq remained steady in his corner, his quiet strength making the situation feel even more unfair. The night was clearly heading toward a breaking point. An elderly lady sitting a few tables away had been watching everything quietly. She gently waved Mike over when he passed by and spoke to him in a soft voice. "Could you please bring that tall gentleman in the corner a glass of water? And slip this note in with it," she said, handing him a small folded piece of paper. Mike nodded, looking a bit nervous, but doing as she asked. A few minutes later, he quietly placed the glass in front of Big Shaq along with the note. Big Shaq picked it up and read the simple words, "Hold your head high." A soft, genuine smile spread across his face for the first time in a while. That small act of kindness warmed him inside, cutting through the cold and disrespectful atmosphere Sophia had created. It reminded him that not everyone in the room was judging him. Some people still saw the good in others, even when it wasn't obvious. He looked toward the elderly lady and gave her a respectful nod of thanks. She smiled back warmly, her eyes full of understanding. The moment was quiet, but it carried a lot of meaning. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes noticed it too, and Mrs. Hayes whispered, "See that? One kind person can make a big difference." The small gesture seemed to lift some of the heavy weight that had been pressing down on the room. Rachel watched from her table and felt her eyes sting a little. "At least someone is being decent," she said softly to her friend. Big Shaq took a sip of the water, feeling a bit of renewed strength. The kindness from a stranger gave him hope that not all hearts were closed tonight. Sophia, on the other hand, caught a glimpse of what happened and looked even more annoyed, but she said nothing. The emotional weight in the room grew heavier, but now it was mixed with something else. A quiet sense of humanity pushing back against the cruelty. Big Shaq sat a little taller, holding onto that small light in the middle of the darkness. These little moments of kindness were becoming the only warmth in an otherwise cold night, and they were quietly preparing the way for what was still to come. The air in the restaurant was already thick with tension when Mr. Reynolds suddenly burst out from the back office, moving faster than anyone had seen him move before. His eyes locked onto the corner table, and his face went from professional to completely stunned. He rushed straight over, nearly knocking into a chair, and stopped in front of Big Shaq. "Big Shaq!" he exclaimed, his voice loud and filled with respect. "What an honor to have the owner of the restaurant here tonight. I'm so deeply sorry for the delay and everything you've been through. We had no idea it was you." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. The entire restaurant fell into dead silence. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Glasses were set down. Every single conversation stopped at once. Heads turned sharply toward the back corner as people tried to understand what they had just heard. Sophia, who had been walking past with a tray, froze mid-step, her face drained of all color. The tray shook violently in her hands as the truth slammed into her like a crushing wave. Her knees felt weak. This couldn't be happening. Big Shaq looked up calmly and said in his deep, steady voice, "It's okay, Reynolds. I just came for a quiet dinner." But almost no one heard him. The shock was too overwhelming. Whispers erupted everywhere. "He owns this place? That's Big Shaq. The Big Shaq?" Voices rose in disbelief and awe. The elegant dining room that had felt so cold and judgmental moments ago was now electric with emotion. Sophia's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. Her chest tightened painfully as every rude word she had thrown at him replayed in her mind like a nightmare. Shame washed over her in hot, crushing waves. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. Tears stung her eyes as she stood there, exposed in front of everyone. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes looked at each other with wide eyes, a mix of shock and deep satisfaction on their faces. Rachel gripped her friend's arm tightly, whispering, "Oh my God, she's been treating the owner like that this whole time." The emotional intensity in the room was overwhelming. Some guests looked embarrassed for having stayed silent. Others stared at Sophia with clear judgment. Big Shaq remained seated and composed, but his calm presence only made the moment more powerful. The quiet dinner had exploded into something no one would ever forget. Sophia stood frozen, her world crumbling around her as the full weight of her actions finally crashed down. The silence was deafening, and the entire restaurant held its breath, waiting for what would happen next. The whispers exploded across the restaurant like wildfire. "He owns the place? That's really Big Shaq?" Voices overlapped in disbelief and shock. The elegant dining room, once filled with quiet chatter, was now buzzing with stunned reactions. Sophia stood frozen just a few feet away, her hands shaking so badly that the tray she was holding nearly slipped from her grip. Her heart hammered painfully in her chest as a wave of cold dread washed over her. The reality hit harder with every passing second. Big Shaq stayed seated, calm as ever, his broad shoulders relaxed despite the chaos swirling around him. He looked directly at Sophia with kind but steady eyes and said softly, "You didn't need to know who I was. Every person who walks through that door deserves basic respect." His words were gentle, but they carried a powerful weight that cut straight through the noise. They weren't angry, yet they struck deep. Tears welled up in Sophia's eyes, blurring her vision. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. Shame burned hot on her face and deep in her chest. Every rude comment, every deliberate delay, every mocking look she had given him replayed in her mind like a painful movie she couldn't pause. She felt exposed, small, and deeply regretful. The tears spilled over, running down her cheeks as she stood there in front of the entire restaurant. Mr. Hayes nodded slowly, murmuring to his wife, "He didn't even raise his voice. That's real strength." Rachel watched with wide eyes, her hand over her mouth. The emotional intensity in the room was overwhelming. Some guests looked away, embarrassed by their own silence. Others stared at Sophia with a mix of pity and judgment. The air felt thick with tension and raw emotion. Big Shaq remained composed, giving her a small, understanding nod. But Sophia could barely hold herself together. The shame was crushing, and the weight of her actions felt heavier than anything she had ever carried. The night had reached a breaking point, and for Sophia, everything was changing in this painful, unforgettable moment. Big Shaq sat quietly for a moment, letting the heavy silence fill the room. Then he looked at Sophia with calm but serious eyes and asked gently but firmly, "Tell me, Sophia, how do you think every customer who walks through that door should be treated?" His voice was steady and sincere, carrying a quiet power that touched everyone listening. Sophia's breath caught. She tried to speak, but her voice broke right away. Tears welled up in her eyes as she struggled to get the words out. "I let my own fears and insecurities make me cruel," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I judged you before I even knew you. I was unfair and mean, and I'm so sorry." A couple of tears slipped down her cheeks as the regret showed clearly on her face. The whole room leaned in, hearts beating with quiet emotion. Guests watched with sympathy and discomfort. Mr. Hayes gently held his wife's hand, while Rachel felt her own eyes sting. The sincerity in Sophia's broken apology touched something deep in many people. Big Shaq listened with understanding, his expression kind but honest. The emotional weight of the moment hung in the air. Sophia stood there, vulnerable and full of remorse, as the reality of what she had done finally sank in. It was a painful but honest turning point for her and for everyone watching. Big Shaq sat quietly for a moment, looking at Sophia with understanding in his eyes. Then he spoke in a calm, deep voice, sharing a piece of his own past. "I know what it feels like to be judged before people even know you," he said. "When I was younger, I was turned away from opportunities and looked down on just because of how I looked and the clothes I wore. It hurt, but I learned that judging people by their clothes or shoes only closes doors that kindness can open." Sophia listened closely, her tears streaming down her face. His words hit her deeply. She saw parts of her own pain and insecurity reflected in his story, and it made the regret feel even heavier in her chest. She wiped her eyes, but the tears kept coming as she realized how much her actions had mirrored the very thing that once hurt him. The room stayed completely silent, everyone moved by the honesty and vulnerability in Big Shaq's voice. Mr. Hayes nodded slowly, deeply touched. Rachel felt a lump in her throat, realizing this was more than just a simple dinner gone wrong. It had become a moment of real human connection. Big Shaq continued gently. "We all carry our own struggles, but we don't have to pass that pain on to others." His words were simple, but they carried warmth and wisdom that settled over the entire restaurant. Sophia stood there, crying quietly, feeling both ashamed and strangely hopeful at the same time. The emotional weight of his story touched every heart in the room. It was no longer just about what had happened tonight. It had become something much deeper and more meaningful. The heavy silence in the restaurant was finally broken when Mr. Hayes slowly stood up from his table. His voice was calm, but carried clear regret as he spoke. "We should have spoken up sooner," he said, looking around the room. "Watching how this young man was being treated tonight was wrong, and I'm sorry I stayed silent. I should have done something instead of just sitting here." His wife held his hand tightly, her eyes misty as she nodded in agreement, clearly moved by her husband's words. Rachel stood up next, her voice shaking with honest emotion. "I felt it too," she admitted, her words coming straight from the heart. "I saw how unfairly he was being treated from the moment he walked in, but I stayed quiet because I didn't want to get involved. I'm really sorry for that. It wasn't right." Her confession seemed to give others the courage to speak. One by one, more guests began to open up. A middle-aged man at a nearby table said, "I noticed what was happening, but I convinced myself it wasn't my place to say anything. That was the easy way out, and I regret it." An older woman added softly, her voice thick with emotion, "I should have spoken up. My silence helped allow the hurt to continue, and I feel terrible about it now." Their honest admissions filled the room with a powerful sense of reflection and shared responsibility. The emotional release was deep and moving. Several people wiped tears from their eyes as they faced their own inaction. The guilt that had been hanging over the room began to ease, replaced by a quiet determination to be better. Sophia stood listening, fresh tears rolling down her cheeks. She felt the weight of everyone's words, realizing how many people had seen the unfairness but chosen not to step in. Big Shaq sat quietly, listening with respect and understanding. This wasn't about blame. It was about real human growth. The restaurant felt different now, warmer and more connected, as hearts opened after the painful events of the evening. The night had turned into something far more meaningful than anyone had expected. Sophia took a shaky step closer to Big Shaq's table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her whole body trembled as she tried to gather the courage to speak. With tears already streaming down her face, she said in a trembling voice, "I judged you before you even sat down. I looked at your clothes and decided you didn't belong here. I was scared of being seen as less than the others, so I pushed that fear onto you. I made you feel small and unwelcome in your own restaurant. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me." Her words were filled with deep regret and pain. She could barely get them out without breaking down. The guilt she had been carrying finally poured out, raw and honest. Big Shaq looked at her with kind, understanding eyes. He slowly reached out and placed a gentle, reassuring hand on her shoulder. His touch was warm and steady, offering comfort in the middle of her storm. "Forgiveness starts with wanting to change," he said softly, his deep voice full of warmth. "And I can see that desire in you right now. That's what matters most. We all make mistakes, but it's how we grow from them that defines us." His words wrapped around her like a gentle embrace, easing some of the crushing shame she felt. Sophia's shoulders shook as she cried even harder. The kindness in his voice and the understanding in his eyes made her feel both worse for what she had done and hopeful that she could become better. She covered her face with her hands for a moment, overwhelmed by emotion. The entire restaurant watched in respectful silence, many guests with tears in their own eyes. Mr. Hayes and his wife held each other's hands tightly, deeply moved. Rachel whispered to her friend, "This is so powerful." The moment felt sacred, a real, heartfelt connection between two people in front of everyone. It wasn't just an apology, it was the beginning of healing, forgiveness, and real change. Big Shaq kept his hand on her shoulder a little longer, offering quiet strength. Sophia stood there crying, but for the first time that night, she also felt a small light of hope growing inside her heart. This tearful apology had touched everyone in the room and changed the course of the evening forever. Big Shaq slowly rose from his chair, his tall, powerful frame drawing every eye in the restaurant. The room was completely quiet as he stood there, with natural confidence and humility. He looked around at the guests, at Sophia, who was still standing nearby with tear-streaked cheeks, and at the staff watching nervously. In his deep, steady voice that carried warmth and authority, he began to speak. "This world is quick to judge people by appearances," he said, "by the clothes they wear, the shoes on their feet, or how they look when they walk through the door. We make assumptions before we even know someone's name or story. But places like this restaurant should be different. They should be safe spaces where every person, no matter who they are or where they come from, feels seen, respected, and truly valued." His words landed deeply, touching hearts across the room. Guests sat in silence, many nodding slowly as they reflected on their own lives. Mr. Hayes held his wife closer, both of them visibly moved by the message. Rachel felt a lump in her throat, thinking about times she had judged others too quickly. Even some of the staff members lowered their heads, feeling the weight of his message. Big Shaq continued gently but powerfully. Tonight wasn't only about one person's mistakes. It was a reminder for all of us. Real worth isn't on the outside. It's in the way we treat each other, especially when no one else is watching. Kindness costs nothing, but it can change everything. He paused, letting his words sink in. The atmosphere in the restaurant had completely shifted, from tension and shame to a shared sense of understanding and hope. Sophia stood listening, fresh tears rolling down her face as his message healed something inside her. The lesson wasn't just for her, it was for every person in that room. Big Shaq's calm presence and honest words created a powerful moment of connection. People felt inspired to be better, challenged to change, and hopeful for a kinder world. This was the big lesson of the night, one that would stay with everyone long after they left the restaurant. What began as an ordinary dinner had become an unforgettable experience that touched every heart in the room. After the last guests had finally gone home and the front doors were locked for the night, the restaurant fell into a rare, heavy silence. The staff slowly gathered in the main dining area, the bright chandeliers dimmed low to create a softer, more intimate feeling. They formed a big circle around Big Shaq, who stood calmly in the center like a steady anchor. No one spoke at first. The emotional exhaustion from the long, intense evening was still hanging over everyone. Big Shaq looked at each person in the circle one by one, his eyes kind but honest. He took a slow breath and began to speak in his deep, warm voice. "Mistakes don't define us," he said gently. "How we fix them does. Tonight was tough for all of us, but it can become a turning point if we choose to learn from it and grow instead of hiding from what happened." He paused for a moment, then shared a couple of short stories from his own life. "When I was young, I once got cut from a team because the coach said I didn't look like a basketball player," he said with a small smile. "I went home hurt, but I kept working hard. Years later, that same coach told me he was wrong. That taught me never to judge someone by how they look on the outside." The team listened closely, many nodding with understanding. Big Shaq continued, "Another time, I walked into an important business meeting dressed casually after practice. Someone almost didn't take me seriously until I started speaking. It reminded me that first impressions can be wrong and respect should be given to everyone from the start." His stories felt personal and real, making the lesson even more powerful. The air felt thick with reflection and quiet hope. Sophia stood near the edge of the circle, her eyes still red, deeply moved by his words. Mike and the others shifted on their feet, thinking about their own choices that night. Big Shaq went on, "This restaurant is more than just fancy tables and expensive dishes. It's a place where people come to feel welcome and respected. Let's make sure we live up to that promise every single day." The circle felt united and hopeful. There were soft apologies exchanged, small promises made, and a growing sense of teamwork. For Sophia and the whole staff, this gathering turned a painful night into the beginning of real change and growth. Big Shaq's stories and presence gave them all strength to move forward together. Sophia stood in the middle of the circle, her emotions finally breaking through completely. She cried openly, no longer holding back the tears that had been building all night. With a trembling voice filled with sincerity and pain, she said, "I promise to treat every guest with the respect they deserve, not just because it's my job or because I'm scared of getting in trouble, but because I truly want to become a better person. I don't want to make anyone feel the way I made Big Shaq feel tonight, small, unwanted, and judged." Big Shaq nodded warmly, his eyes full of genuine encouragement. "That change starts tonight," he said gently, "and I believe in you. The fact that you're standing here making this promise with tears in your eyes means you're already taking the first real step. Keep going, one day at a time." His words felt like a warm light in the middle of her darkness. To make the moment even more meaningful, Big Shaq shared one more short story. "I once made a big mistake early in my career that hurt someone on my team," he said softly. "I felt terrible afterward, just like you do now. But I apologized, worked hard to change, and that relationship became one of the strongest I have today. Change is possible when your heart is in it." Sophia listened closely, feeling understood and less alone in her regret. The rest of the staff watched with quiet respect. Mike nodded slowly, and a few others had tears in their eyes too. The circle felt deeply connected in that moment, not just as co-workers, but as people trying to be better. Sophia wiped her tears and stood a little taller, a small but real spark of hope growing in her heart. Big Shaq looked around at everyone. "We all have the power to grow from our mistakes," he reminded them. "Tonight showed us that clearly. Let's carry this lesson with us." Sophia's promise wasn't just words spoken in the moment. It was the beginning of real change for her and a turning point for the whole team. The painful night had planted seeds of growth, forgiveness, and hope that would continue to bloom long after they left the restaurant. The next morning, soft sunlight poured through the large restaurant windows, bathing everything in a gentle, hopeful glow. Sophia arrived earlier than usual, her heart still heavy from the night before, but carrying a quiet resolve she hadn't felt in years. She took a deep breath as she tied her apron, remembering Big Shaq's words and her own tearful promise. Today was the first real test of that promise. When the first guest walked in, a simply dressed older man in faded jeans and a plain button-up shirt, Sophia didn't hesitate like she once would have. Instead, she greeted him with a warm, genuine smile that reached all the way to her eyes. "Good morning, sir," she said kindly, her voice soft and sincere. "Welcome to La Lumière. Would you like a table near the window so you can enjoy the morning light?" The man looked pleasantly surprised by her warmth and thanked her as she led him to a comfortable spot. As she took his order, Sophia made sure to listen carefully and respond with real care. She no longer saw just another customer. She saw a person who deserved respect and kindness. That small shift in her heart felt both scary and beautiful, like she was finally becoming the person she had promised to be. Each kind interaction chipped away at the heavy shame she had carried since last night, slowly replacing it with a quiet sense of pride and hope. Later that morning, Big Shaq returned quietly, dressed casually again. He didn't make a big entrance or draw attention to himself. He simply chose a corner table and sat down to observe. When Sophia noticed him, her heart skipped a beat. She walked over with slightly nervous but sincere steps and said softly, "Thank you again for everything last night. I'm really trying to keep my promise, one guest at a time." Her voice carried real emotion, a mix of gratitude and determination. Big Shaq smiled warmly, his eyes full of encouragement. "I can already see the difference," he replied gently. "That warmth in your smile is real. Keep going. I believe in you." His words wrapped around her like a comforting hug, easing some of the lingering pain from the previous evening. The small but meaningful shift felt like the beginning of something truly beautiful. Other staff members seemed more attentive and kind that morning too, inspired by the changes they had all committed to. The restaurant felt warmer, more alive with genuine care and humanity. Sophia greeted every guest with the same heartfelt attention throughout the day, no matter how they looked or what they wore. By the end of the morning service, she felt lighter. The heavy guilt from last night was slowly transforming into hope and purpose. Big Shaq watched from his table with a quiet, satisfied smile, knowing this was only the start of real, lasting change. The painful lesson from the night before was gently turning into something good, one kind smile and respectful interaction at a time. It was the beginning of a new chapter for Sophia, for the restaurant, and for everyone who had witnessed that unforgettable evening. In the days and weeks that followed that unforgettable night, the restaurant began to feel different in the most beautiful way. Regular guests started returning, many of them carrying the memory of what had happened like a quiet treasure in their hearts. Rachel came back with her friend one evening, her eyes lighting up when she spotted Big Shaq at his usual corner table. She walked over with a warm, grateful smile and said, her voice thick with emotion, "I've been thinking about that night every day since. The way you handled everything and the lesson you shared, it really touched my heart. I've caught myself judging people less and trying to be kinder. Thank you for opening my eyes." The Hayes family returned a few days later, this time bringing their adult children along. Mr. Hayes shook Big Shaq's hand with both of his own, his voice full of quiet sincerity. "That evening changed something in us," he said. "We've been talking about it as a family. Thank you for reminding us how important it is to stand up for what's right and to treat every person with dignity." Mrs. Hayes wiped a tear from her eye and added softly, We want our grandchildren to grow up learning this lesson. Your words that night have stayed with all of us." Big Shaq listened humbly, nodding with a gentle, understanding smile. "I'm glad it meant something to you all," he replied warmly. "That night wasn't just about one mistake. It was about all of us choosing to do better and to see the good in each other." The restaurant slowly transformed into a warmer, kinder place. Sophia greeted every guest with genuine care and respect, her smile no longer forced, but real and heartfelt. The rest of the staff followed her example, creating an atmosphere where people felt truly seen and welcomed, no matter how they looked or what they wore. Laughter came more easily, conversations felt deeper, and even small interactions carried more warmth and humanity. Regular customers noticed the positive change right away. They told their friends and family, and new guests kept returning because they sensed something special in the air, a feeling of belonging, respect, and kindness that was rare to find. The painful night had planted seeds of compassion that were now blooming beautifully. Big Shaq visited from time to time, sitting quietly and watching the transformation with deep satisfaction in his eyes. Hearts had truly changed, not just Sophia's, but those of many guests and staff members who had been part of that night. What began as embarrassment, shame, and tension had grown into lasting lessons of empathy, courage, and the quiet power of kindness. The restaurant was no longer simply a fancy place to eat. It had become a symbol of hope, healing, and the beautiful possibility of positive change. As the city lights began to sparkle softly against the evening sky, Big Shaq stepped out of the restaurant and into the cool night air. He walked slowly along the sidewalk, his tall frame moving with that familiar, quiet confidence. A small, peaceful smile rested on his face while the memories of the night played gently in his mind. The bustling streets of Beverly Hills felt calmer tonight, as if the city itself was reflecting on everything that had happened. One single dinner had sparked something real and lasting. It wasn't just Sophia whose heart had been transformed. It was Rachel, who left determined to be more courageous in speaking up. It was the Hayes family, who now wanted to pass on the lesson of kindness to their children and grandchildren. It was every staff member who promised to create a warmer, more respectful environment. And it was every guest who had witnessed the power of quiet strength and honest reflection. Big Shaq felt a deep warmth in his chest as he walked, knowing that moments like these had the power to ripple outward and touch many lives. True strength, he realized once again as he looked up at the glowing lights, isn't about raising your voice or proving how important you are. It's about choosing kindness even when it's hard, even when no one expects it. And that simple, powerful choice has the ability to light up the darkest corners of the heart, turning pain into growth, shame into forgiveness, and anger into understanding. He paused for a moment under a soft street lamp and glanced back at the restaurant. Through the windows, he could see the warm glow inside and the gentle movement of the team as they closed up for the night. Sophia was there, working with a lighter step and a more genuine smile on her face. Big Shaq took a slow, deep breath, feeling truly grateful. What had started as judgment and hurt had quietly grown into respect, healing, and real change. As he continued walking into the night, the city lights seemed to shine a little brighter around him. He carried with him the quiet satisfaction of knowing that one evening, one act of calm strength, and one honest conversation had planted seeds that would continue to grow long after tonight. The restaurant was no longer just a fancy place to eat. It had become a symbol of compassion, courage, and the beautiful power of second chances. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't that Big Shaq revealed who he was. It was proving that kindness always wins in the end, that hearts can truly change, and that hope is always waiting just around the corner for those willing to reach for it. The lesson for all of us. This story reminds us that we never really know someone's full story just by looking at them. A simple smile, a kind word, or a moment of respect can change everything. In our daily lives, may we choose to be the light instead of adding to the darkness. because true strength lies in treating every person with dignity, no matter how they look or where they come from. And in doing so, we don't just change others, we change ourselves for the better.